Imagine a war so short, you could watch it during your lunch break. No long trenches, no drawn-out campaigns, just 38 minutes of firepower, chaos, and surrender. This is the story of the Anglo-Zanzibar War, the shortest recorded war in history. To understand how a war could last just 38 minutes, we need to step back into the 19th century, to the tropical island of Zanzibar, lying just off the coast of East Africa. For centuries, Zanzibar had been a thriving center of trade. It was known for cloves, ivory, and tragically, slaves, serving as a gateway between Africa, the Middle East, and the Indian Ocean world. But by the late 1800s, European imperial powers had turned their eyes on Africa. The British and Germans, hungry for control, negotiated over colonies like pieces on a chessboard. In 1890, the Heligoland-Zanzibar Treaty gave Britain dominant control over the island. From that moment on, Zanzibar was a British protectorate in all but name. The reigning Sultan, Hamad bin Thuwaini, was compliant. He worked closely with British authorities, who saw him as a stabilizing ally. But everything changed on August 25, 1896. That morning, Sultan Hamad was found dead in the palace, suddenly and suspiciously. Almost immediately, his cousin Khalid bin Barghash took power. He entered the palace, declared himself Sultan, and hoisted the royal flag, all without British consent. For the British, this was unacceptable. Not only had Khalid acted without approval, but he was known to be defiant, ambitious, and deeply opposed to British control. The British consul in Zanzibar, Basil Cave, issued a clear demand: Khalid must step down. But Khalid refused. He fortified the palace, gathered an armed guard of nearly 2,800 men, and stood his ground. In response, the British assembled 3 warships in the harbour. On the night of August 26th, an ultimatum was delivered: leave the palace by 9 a.m. tomorrow, or we will open fire. The clock had started ticking. In the harbour, the Royal Navy was ready. 3 warships had taken position just offshore: HMS St. George, the flagship, armed with heavy naval guns, HMS Philomel and HMS Raccoon, smaller but still deadly. On land, a small force of British Marines and sailors waited with Gatling guns and field artillery, their barrels pointed at the palace. In total, the British had around 150 men and overwhelming firepower. Inside the Sultan's palace, Khalid bin Barghash refused to back down. He had gathered nearly 2,800 defenders, palace guards, loyal Zanzibaris, and a few artillery pieces positioned at the gates. The royal yacht Glasgow, anchored nearby, was armed and ready to defend the new Sultan. At exactly 8 a.m., the British sent a final warning. Khalid gave no reply. And then came the moment. 9:02 a.m. A sharp command echoed from the deck of HMS St. George. Seconds later, the ship's main guns thundered, hurling shells straight into the palace walls. Within minutes, smoke and fire engulfed the ornate wooden structure. The palace began to collapse. The Glasgow returned fire, but was quickly sunk by British shells, disappearing beneath the harbour waves. Khalid's men fired a few cannon volleys, wildly and inaccurately, but they were hopelessly outmatched. In the chaos, panic spread among the defenders. Some fled, others were cut down by Gatling gunfire in the palace courtyard. By 9:40 a.m., the shooting stopped. The Anglo-Zanzibar War, such as it was, had lasted exactly 38 minutes. By 9:40 a.m., the guns fell silent, and the once proud Sultan's palace lay in smouldering ruins. Over 500 Zanzibaris had been killed or wounded, most of them palace guards caught in the crossfire or crushed beneath the collapsing structure. On the British side, the toll was almost non-existent, just 1 wounded sailor. Sultan Khalid bin Barghash had fled the palace through a back door and sought asylum in the nearby German consulate, where British forces were unwilling to violate diplomatic protection. The Germans smuggled him out of Zanzibar weeks later aboard the SMS Seidler. Eventually relocated, the British swiftly installed Sultan Khalid bin Barghash, a figure they deemed cooperative and loyal. Under his rule, Zanzibar officially became a British protectorate in practice and in spirit. The new Sultan abolished slavery, but the island remained under tight colonial control for decades to come. The 38-minute conflict may have been short, but it sent a lasting message: resistance against imperial power, no matter how symbolic, will be met with overwhelming force and swift consequences. The Anglo-Zanzibar War faded quickly from headlines, but it endures as a powerful symbol of the imbalanced might of empires and the speed with which history can be written. It may seem like a historical oddity, a brief flash in the vast timeline of empire and conquest. But beneath its almost absurd duration lies a deeper truth. In just 38 minutes, the full weight of British naval power crushed a centuries-old sultanate, sending a message not just to Zanzibar, but to every corner of the imperial world: resistance would be swift and futile. Sometimes, a war doesn't need to last years to be unforgettable. And perhaps that's why, even more than a century later, we still talk about it,